All right, good morning. Good morning, everybody. All right, we are jumping into Second Samuel. We just wrapped up First Samuel last week, and so now we are going to see the continuation of David's story after the death of Saul. So let's crack into chapter 1, or yeah, chapter 1, verse 1. And I'm reading out of the ESV. After the death of Saul, when David had returned from striking down the Amalekites, David remained 2 days in Ziklag. And on the third day, behold, a man from Saul's camp with his clothes torn and dirt on his head came from Saul's camp with clothes torn and dirt on his head. And when he came to David, he fell on the ground and paid homage. David said to him, "Where do you come from?" And David said to him, "I have escaped from the camp of Israel." And David said to him, "How did it go? Tell me." And he answered, "The people fled from battle, and also many of the people have fallen and are dead. And Saul and his son Jonathan are also dead." Then David said to the young man who told him, "How do you know that Saul and his son Jonathan are dead?" And the young man said to him, "By chance, I happened to be on Mount Gilboa, and there was Saul leaning on his spear, and behold, the chariots and horsemen were close upon him. And when he looked behind him, he saw me, and he called to me, and I answered, 'Here I am.' And he said to me, 'Who are you?' I answered him, 'I am an Amalekite.' And he said to me, 'Stand beside me and kill me, for anguish has seized me, and yet my life still lingers.' So I stood beside him and killed him, because I was sure that he could not live after he had fallen. And I took the crown that was on his head and the armlet that was on his arm, and I brought them here to my Lord." Then David took hold of his clothes and tore them, and so did all the men who were with him. And they mourned and wept and fasted until evening for Saul and for Jonathan his son, and for the people of the Lord and for the house of Israel, because they had fallen by the sword. And David said to the young man who told him, "Where do you come from?" And he answered, I am the son of a sojourner, an Amalekite." David said to him, "How is it you were not afraid to put out your hand to destroy the Lord's anointed?" Then David called one of the young men and said, "Go execute him." And he struck him down so that he died. And David said to him, "Your blood be on your head, for your own mouth has testified against you, saying, 'I have killed the Lord's anointed.'" And David lamented with this lamentation over Saul and Jonathan his son. And he said should be taught and he said it should be taught to the people of Judah. "Behold, it is written in the book of Jeshar." He said, "Your glory, O Israel, is slain on your high places. How the mighty have fallen. Tell it not in Gath, publish it not in the streets of Ashkelon, lest the daughters of the Philistines rejoice, lest the daughters of the uncircumcised exult. You mountains of Gilboa, let there be no dew or rain upon you, nor fields of offerings. For there the shield of the mighty was defiled, the shield of Saul not anointed with oil. For the blood of the slain, for the fat of the mighty, for the bow of Jonathan turned not back, and the sword of Saul returned not empty. Saul and Jonathan, beloved and lovely, in life and in death, they were not divided. They were swifter than eagles, they were stronger than lions, You daughters of Israel, weep over Saul, who clothed you luxuriously in scarlet, who put ornaments of gold on your apparel. How the mighty have fallen in the midst of battle. Jonathan lies slain on your high places. I am distressed for you, my brother Jonathan. Very pleasant have you been to me. Your love to me was extraordinary, surpassing the love of women. How the mighty have fallen and the weapons of war perished. After this, David inquired of the Lord, shall I go up into any of the cities of Judah? And the Lord said to him, go up. David said, to which shall I go up? And he said, to Hebron. So David went up there, and his two wives also, Ahinoam and Jezreel, and Abigail, the widow of Nabal of Carmel. And David brought up his men who were with him, everyone in his household, and they lived in the towns of Hebron. And the men of Judah came, and there they anointed David king over the house of Judah. When they told David, it was the men of Jabesh Gilead who buried Saul. David sent messengers to the men of Jabesh Gilead and said to them, may you be blessed by the Lord, because you showed this loyalty to Saul your Lord and buried him. Now may the Lord show steadfast love and faithfulness to you, and I will do good to you because you have done this thing. Now therefore let your hands be strong and be valiant, for Saul your Lord is dead, and the house of Judah has anointed me king over them. But Abner the son of Ner, commander of Saul's army, took Ishbosheth the son of Saul and brought him over to Mahanaim. And he made him king over Gilead and the Asherites and Jezreel and Ephraim and Benjamin and all Israel. Ishbosheth, Saul's son, was 40 years old when he began to reign over Israel. And he reigned 2 years, but the house of Judah followed David. And the time that David was king in Hebron over the house of Judah was 7 years and 6 months. Abner, the son of Ner, and the servants of Ishbosheth, the son of Saul, went out to Mahanaim to Gibeon. And Joab, the son of Zariah, yeah. And the servants of David went out and met them at the pool of Gibeon. And they sat down, the one on the one side of the pool and the other on the other side of the pool. And Abner said to Joab, let the young men arise and compete before us. And Joab said, let them arise. Then they arose and passed over by number 12 for Benjamin and Ishbosheth the son of Saul, and 12 of the servants of David, and each caught his opponent by the head and thrust his sword in his opponent's side. So they fell down together. Therefore that place was called Helkath Hazram, which is at Gibeon. The battle was very fierce that day, and Abner and the men of Israel were beaten before the servants of David. And the three sons of Zariah were there, Joab, Abishai, and Asahel. Now Asahel was as swift of foot as a wild gazelle. And Asahel pursued Abner, and as he went, he turned neither to the right hand nor to the left from following Abner. Then Abner looked behind him and said, is it you, Asahel? And he answered, it is I. Abner said to him, turn aside to your right hand or to your left and seize one of the young men and take his spoil. But Ashtael would not turn aside from following him. And Abner said again to Ashtael, "Turn aside from following me. Why should I strike you to the ground? How then could I lift up my face to your brother Joab?" But he refused to turn aside. Therefore Abner struck him in the stomach with the butt of the spear, so that the spear came out at his back. And he fell there and died where he was. And all who came to that place where Ashtael had fallen and died stood still. But Joab and Abishai pursued Abner, and as the sun was going down, they came to the hill of Emma, which lies before Giah, on the way to the wilderness of Gibeon. And the people of Benjamin gathered themselves together behind Abner and became one group and took their stand on top of the hill. And Abner called to Joab, "Shall the sword devour forever? Do you not know that the end will be bitter? How long will it be before you tell your people to turn from pursuit of their brothers?" And Joab said, "As God lives, if you had not spoken, surely the men would not have given up the pursuit of their brothers until the morning." So Joab blew the trumpet, and all the men stopped and pursued Israel no more, nor did they fight any more. And Abner and his men went all that night through Arabah. They crossed the Jordan, and marching the whole morning, they came to Mahanaim. Joab returned from the pursuit of Abner. And when he had gathered all the people together, there was missing from David's servants 19 men, besides Asahel. But the servants of David had struck down of Benjamin 360 of Abner's men. They took up Ashtael and buried him in the tomb of his father, which was at Bethlehem. And Joab and his men marched all night, and the day broke upon them at Hebron. Okay. Yeah, so let's crack into this. This beginning caught my attention. If you remember in 1 Samuel, we are shown the picture of what is to be Saul's death. Kind of undisputed death, and we know that Saul and his sons all died together in the battle with the Philistines. And honestly, it's a sad ending to kind of a tragic tale. I don't know. I don't know how else to say it. The story of Saul is not really a happy one. But we and juxtaposed, we see David partnering with the Philistines, and God stepping in and preventing a complete and total alliance. And David's brought back through really unfortunate circumstances. The Amalekites basically stole the families and stole the possessions, and this leads to him strengthening himself in God, and he defeats the Amalekites, and so on and so forth. And we see this as kind of the turning point for David. In some ways, he kind of becomes a new man in certain ways, almost like this is like a kind of a maturation process, right? And he knew heading back, the messenger had his what would be, I guess, traditional signs of you hear the clothes torn and the dust on his head. You see that same kind of imagery over and over again, to express bad news or mourning or what have you. But the Amalekite tells his story, and this is like almost like after the camera shuts off at the end of First Samuel, not to be what have you, because it's not like a one for one sort of thing, but you have this almost like it's presented like a behind the scenes sort of thing with the Amalekite coming on Saul, which either I've come to the conclusion that it's either a lie, which I don't understand what the point of that would be. Now, granted, I'm not coming at this from every single academic layer and level. Somebody who is taken the purposeful time to be in the academics of it all, could probably tell me a little bit, shine some different light, I guess, on this. But I look at something like this and just taking the full context of the story, the narrative of all of it, to have this come in immediately, it doesn't, I don't know, to me, it doesn't fit nearly the same kind of way of the honestly sobering aspect of this, that what if Saul didn't die by being thrust through? That truly and completely it was that tragic of a tale that he survived and had to eventually be killed. That the Amalekite was telling the story, and this is just kind of what happened after First Samuel cuts away. And, you know, and then taking the crown and the bracelet. You know, I don't know. I hold all of that loosely, and I encourage you that you would do the research on that. So, but moving on, you know, you have David's reaction to the mourning of Saul and his words that he has, that he's ultimately respectful, and he's ultimately, you know, for all of the preponderance of backstory, at the end of the day, you have somebody that had a deep love for God and a deep understanding of his commands. And he took those things seriously, and he sought after the heart of God. And that had an effect on how he treated and how he reacted and things like that. So I just it's very significant when you remember that this is a story of people. This isn't a morality play. This isn't, oh, this is a good ideal. This is how man reacted to the situation at hand. And that, to me, is catching. You know? It's interesting when you get into like the book of Jasher and the tie back into Joshua and that part of it. It's and getting into the ancient writings, and there's a lot to nerd out about this, but we can't lose sight of that aspect of it, that there is honest to goodness mourning that takes place. Very real, very tangible. And I think sometimes we miss that. We miss that idea that there are situations that call for mourning. So, and I find very interesting the interaction between the Amalekite and David, and his words of being of the consequences of his hand being against the Lord's anointed, and he's asking this question and things like that. And I just think that that's interesting. You know what I mean? That does come up. It's not just blown past, because if he's telling the truth, and if he's not, he's not. I do understand that there is a popular thought in Christian academics is that there is a juxtaposition between the Amalek and our fleshly carnal desire. And so the Amalekite being a representation of like lying flesh, whatever, that sort of thing. Okay, that's possible. That is possible. If we're looking at the overall narrative, I can absolutely see and leave the door open for the fact that could be a thing. So that's that. So yeah, that's where we leave things. This is one of those bittersweet sections for me. I think it's easy to focus in on certain parts of this, and I think that there's a lot that goes into I think there's a lot that goes into being able to unpack every single nuance of this, and not just the academics, but also the relational portion of that. When you consider the way that David is mourning after his friend, I think is beautiful. And so pass this into chapter 2. This is where we get into a bit more of the historicity of it. This is something that we are now going over the rest of like what life looks like between the war between David becoming king over the tribe of Judah, and then the war against the other tribes of Israel, and Abner killing Eshel, and all of that. And we're seeing the groundwork for David to be installed as the new king. And that's something that we are going to get into next time. So let's go ahead and pray. Father God, I thank you for today. Father, I thank you for this look into history, this active work, this for the fact that you are active and for us and with us. Father, I thank you. I love you. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, guys, have a great rest of your day, and we will talk to you tomorrow.